While the ability of Western governments to keep secrets is hotly debated, one thing seems certain. Behind the Iron Curtain, secrecy was standard operating procedure. Here, under the Soviets, freedom of the press and government accountability to the public were virtually non-existent.
Many believe that the American government has had more than a casual interest in the possibility of extraterrestrial presence since early in the 20th century. Certainly since reports of flying discs in Roswell, New Mexico in the late 1940s, U.S. Defense Department and intelligence community involvement in the investigation of UFOs has been documented. Aside from the former Project Blue Book and 2 recent Air Force reports attempting to close the case on Roswell, there has been little made public by the government regarding its interest in UFOs. One organization that apparently did study UFOs was the Central Intelligence Agency. Since the Cold War era, it has been alleged that the CIA has actively sought after, on a priority level, the acquisition of any Soviet information that relates to alien contact and technology. One person who confirms such allegations is this man. An agent with the CIA for 6 years, his area of expertise was Russian interest in anomalous activity. Though now employed in the private sector as a security analyst, he has asked not to be identified due to the sensitive nature of both his former status and his current position.
I joined the CIA in 1989, straight out of college. My mission was to monitor and infiltrate the Special Sciences Section of the KGB, a unit of Directorate T, which was a division of the First Chief Directorate. Special Sciences Section's goal was to obtain, analyze, interpret, and exploit any extraterrestrial knowledge. The Special Sciences Section was extremely interested in a number of reported UFO crashes over the former Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries. From the intelligence that our unit was able to obtain, they had recovered at least one portion of a former crash site over the Soviet Union.
This former agent was able to confirm interest not only in the 1968 crash near Beryozovsky, but in other Soviet attempts to recover UFO documentation and technology.
Ever since Stalin had been in control of the Soviet Union, especially in the post-World War II years, he was determined that if there were any technological gains to be made from extraterrestrial technology, that the Soviet Union would be the sole possessor and sole beneficiary of those technologies.
Due to the change of power in the former Soviet Union, many believe that much of the formerly unattainable information from the Cold War era may now be in the hands of the US and British intelligence agencies.
Since the early days of the space race, the US and Russia made many independent breakthroughs. However, some of the new discoveries on both sides were undoubtedly obtained through old-fashioned spying and subsequent reverse engineering.
Since the dawn of modern civilization, obtaining a rival's technology and adapting it to one's own uses have been the cornerstones of military and industrial espionage. This practice of dismantling another's hardware, discovering its secrets, and adapting it has become known as reverse engineering. Since the infamous Roswell incident in 1947, it has been purported that the source of much modern US military technology has been not of this earth.
A number of technologies were either partially inspired or wholly inspired from what was recovered at Roswell. It's amazing that when you look at the profiles from both the sides and from dead on, how close to stealth technology and spy plane designs that the Roswell ship resembles. We firmly believe that she is the design Rosetta Stone and the holy grail for aerospace design technology.
According to witnesses and UFO researchers, debris supposedly collected from the site indicated a technology superior to any existing on Earth during the post-war years.
The possibility exists back in the 40s that because all this new technology came out of Germany, we had scientists from Germany that either we were testing new advanced concepts to us at the time, these rocket engines, which were brand new to us, or this was some kind of smoke screen, if you will, to hide or to put the Russians off guard, make them think we were further along than we really were. And there's been you know, a history of misinformation on both sides trying to keep each other off guard, and that very likely is one of the possibilities. If it wasn't Roswell, we're probably doing it some other place.
Such advances as the Hubble telescope and the Super Arbec missile engines are rumored to have benefited from alien reverse engineering. In addition to Roswell, there is another name heard frequently with regards to reverse engineering. The military facility located in the Nevada desert, commonly known as Area 51. One theory is that Area 51 is the hub of alien reverse engineering. But is the United States the only military power to have engaged in this secretive development of military technology? Or did Soviet military and intelligence organization reverse engineer technology from alien spacecraft that may have been recovered in Russia? Do the Russians have their own version of Area 51, located somewhere in the uninhabited parts of their vast country? Did the KGB, in addition to their agenda of maintaining the hard and fast rules of the communist regime, add to their duties the manipulation of alien technology for the advancement of Soviet power? Thus far, of all documented UFO sightings that have taken place within the former Soviet Union, not one was publicly acknowledged by the KGB. While reverse engineering remains a common practice throughout the world, not only in the military, but industry as well, the question as to whether or not it has ever been used to obtain alien technology remains unanswered. If the Russians had in fact recovered an extraterrestrial vehicle, as they seem to be doing in this footage, they no doubt would have wanted to benefit from its technology. We invited ufologist Stanton Friedman to view the recovered footage and to give us his input.
It would not be surprising if saucers had crashed in the Soviet Union, and if somebody had monitored this on radar from whenever. Satellites, we had satellites, they had satellites at that time, or just a report from a local person. And the kicker is, the fact that you get troops out there and a cameraman doesn't necessarily mean it's a flying saucer. We need to be a little cautious about jumping to conclusions. Now, I think that film is worth a detailed investigation. Those things cost a lot of money, actually, to go over it. You have different specialists looking at it. You know, are the uniforms correct for the time frame? Is the film actually made in the Soviet Union?
We asked Russian film expert Sergei Goncharov to examine the film for its authenticity. He first explained the background of the film cans.
And this is the name of the factory that manufactures the motion picture film in the city of Pereslavl. This is the type of film type A2, which is the emulsion.
After Sergei examined the cans, he felt that they were authentic and consistent with the area and time period from which they had allegedly come.
Now that we've looked at the cans, the next thing to do was to actually find out if the film itself had any markings on it. Okay, in the very beginning of the film, we have this word, which in Russian says начало, or the beginning, or the start. Now, the next bit of information are these two items, M-A-R-T, Mart, which is the month of March, 1969, letter G for year. So the year of 1969, the month of March. Okay, then we have the two bits of information which says plyonka number 267. Plyonka in Russian means emulsion or film, could denote the reel, the roll, or a batch, and this, of course, is the number. The next thing we see is this bit of information. Совершенно секретно, top secret archive of the KGB logo and the word archive of the KGB.
Finally, Sergei Goncharov compared the markings on the film itself to what was printed on the cans.
As you notice right here on the edge of the negative, we have the word безопасная пленка, meaning safety film, and tip A2 or type A2, which is exactly the information that you have on a can.
Next, we showed the film to Russian researcher Paul Stonehill.
The colors of the film, the quality, soldier uniforms. Somebody would have to go into make a special effort to make a film that feels like something that was made in 1960s. I've seen a lot of films made in the 1960s, and this film here is almost of the same quality. It's not a 1980s or 1990s film. The KGB officer that had been looking and touching things looks quite genuine. To me, my gut feeling is this is not something that they had made intentionally to fool people.
UFO researcher Antonio Huneeus offered us his views on the film.
I would say that visually it's very impressive. The first thing that struck me was the good quality, a very, very, very clear footage. You see, of course, it wouldn't be impossible to duplicate, you know, as a hoax. You would have to hire some actors and so on. But it was quite well done. Of course, it could even be some kind of disinformation too, that the KGB was quite notorious about doing disinformation. For what purpose, I don't know, but they might have done some kind of training film or something to... Of course, if it was disinformation aimed against the Americans or something, we never heard of it, so that's also dubious.
Finally, while Mr. Huneeus felt that the film required more investigation, he was impressed and intrigued by it.
Well, I would say that if this is real, and I do not have the elements to make that judgment, this is so far the best footage of an alleged crash UFO or a dead alien that I've seen so far.
To appreciate the difference in attitude here with respect to such unconventional science as the study of UFOs, it is important to understand some of the cultural contrast between Russia and the West.
For hundreds of years, Russian culture has been steeped in religion, mysticism, and superstition. In the times of the Tsars, it was not uncommon for there to be an official court mystic, the most famous of these being the priestly soothsayer, Grigory Rasputin, during the reign of Tsar Nicholas. Even though religious expression was suppressed, it is now making a resurgence, and the many places of worship in Russia are once again housing congregations and becoming a big part of daily life. Russians seem to have an open-minded attitude towards the paranormal and such unconventional sciences as the study of UFOs. During the Soviet era, some of those voicing their beliefs in extraterrestrials were subjected to criticism and censure by Soviet officials. Russian author Yuri Alexandrovich Fomin claims that he has had such experiences.
I was summoned to the regional party committee and asked to deliver a lecture on UFOs for the employees of various scientific research institutions. I agreed. After that lecture, the head of the regional party committee suggested that everyone present should take a stand and subject my lecture to criticism. But that didn't happen. All the people who listened to my lecture would say, "This is sort of interesting. This needs to be studied and examined." And then the head of the party committee said, "You're here to express your agreement with the official reaction to this kind of lectures. And you instead are trying to make sense out of the facts."
While the communists said they weren't interested in UFOs, many around the world were. Some claim that sightings date back hundreds, if not thousands of years. Much like their American counterparts, many modern Russian citizens are very open to the possibility of the unusual.
Many people become victims of tabloids, like Americans today. However, so much information had been collected, and people read about it in underground magazines, have heard about it, that they believe in the extraterrestrial explanation of UFOs, not so much time travel, but as the extraterrestrial. And people in Russia also are more cynical than the Americans in their approach to information, simply because everything was a lie.
Both Americans and Russians believe they have been lied to by their government about many things, including extraterrestrial research. When Russian researchers, headed by former Soviet naval officer Vladimir Shasha, petitioned the Soviet government for official records regarding UFOs, they too were met with a lack of cooperation.
Мы послали запрос.
We sent an inquiry to the archives of the Ministry of Defense and to the archives of the KGB. We got a response that neither KGB archives nor the archives of the Ministry of Defense have any data regarding this incident.
If there is mistrust of the government by Russian and American citizens, it's not without good reason. For Russians, it was more than 70 years of communist rule. For Americans, there has been a steady erosion of trust over the last 30 or 40 years. For Americans, the knowledge that their government was not being honest began in the 1960s, when the war in Southeast Asia escalated with secret bombing campaigns in Cambodia. In the 1980s, arms were sold to support the Contra anti-communists in Nicaragua, in violation of U.S. law and without public knowledge.
God bless America.
It's no wonder that many American and Russian citizens doubt the honesty of government officials. How paranoid is the belief that their governments could withhold knowledge of extraterrestrials? Despite officially denying interest in the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation, the governments of both the US and the Soviet Union have, without question, been interested in what lies beyond our own planet. Man has always been intrigued by the notion of life elsewhere in the galaxy, and both the American and Russian space programs represent a considerable investment to explore the unknowns of our universe. At the close of the Second World War, the United States, now the preeminent world power, turned its eyes from defeating Hitler's Germany to a new rival, the Soviet Union. With Russia's detonation of its own atomic bomb, the United States realized they now had an enemy who wielded the same degree of power. During the Truman administration, loyalty oaths taken by government employees became a common practice, which would eventually lead to the ugly communist witch hunts of the House Un-American Activities Committee. Winston Churchill's pronouncement that Eastern Europe was now behind an Iron Curtain gave birth to a new term for this confrontation between East and West, the Cold War. With fear dominating the United States, paranoia over potential communist influence took the form of weird invaders from other planets. The possibility of a Soviet invasion was too frightening to contemplate. Helmeted men from Mars launching an all-out attack on Earth, however, was another matter. Therefore, Americans retreated to dozens of science fiction films that were thinly veiled warnings against the Red Menace. With Chuck Yeager's historic Flight that broke the sound barrier, the next frontier to conquer would be the stars. This set off a global competition between the world superpowers as to whom would get to the heavens first. It became known as the space race. To meet the demands of such technology, NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, was formed in 1958. The space race would nearly end in defeat for the United States, however, with the launch of Sputnik. The US feared if the Soviets could launch a probe in space, would missiles launched from that probe be far behind? When cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin made his historic orbit around the Earth in 1961, he became the first man in space. The United States realized their only hope of beating the Soviets was to have the first man on the moon. And in this dream, they would find a passionate champion. It was President John F. Kennedy's promise to have a man on the moon by decade's end that shot the space race into another dimension. It would not be until Neil Armstrong's historic first lunar step on July the 29th of 1969, however, that Kennedy's dream would be fulfilled. In years to come, the cumbersome NASA rockets would give way to the more streamlined and modern space shuttle. Even before the fall of communism, a new unity would develop between Russia and the United States. The petty rivalries of the past gave way to a new cooperation, which would culminate in the joint Russian and American crew of the space station Mir. Modern astronauts like Dr. Michael Foale would make history working with their Russian counterparts in space. At long last, the demons of the Cold War had been silenced.
The first human beings in space were Soviet. Were the Russians also among the first to encounter beings not from this Earth?
This footage, which seems to depict Russian pathologists dissecting what appears to be a non-human life form, requires further analysis. We once again asked Stanton Friedman for his comments.
I don't know what to make out of it. I'd certainly say it's worth further investigation. By my standards, it's in my gray basket. Not black, not white, maybe. Worth following up on.
We then asked film expert Sergei Goncharov if he thought that the film's characteristics on this reel were consistent with the time period from which it was supposedly shot.
It certainly is consistent with the information on the can. It is negative. It's got the negative perforations. It's exactly what the information on the can indicated.
Sergei explains the significance of a flash frame, an interesting and possibly important characteristic of the film that was discovered.
All right, now, a flash frame, this is, of course, a flash frame is that piece of film that is, when you push the button on the camera and you start exposure and you stop the camera to stop the exposure, and then you restart the camera again, by virtue of inertia, the camera will sometimes expose either a flash of light, or if you point the camera away from the person in front of it, you will see some other subject matter. Those flash frames appear between the takes and sometimes show things and people that are not part of the scene itself. You have people that have nothing to do with the information that you've seen on a film before or after. Again, an individual in uniform. You see these people performing a procedure. You have somebody in civilian clothes, people that you have not seen before, as this is in a flash frame segment, which was not meant to be as the procedure that was being photographed.
Mr. Goncharov concludes that while the film's stock and camera techniques are consistent with KGB and Soviet government films of that period, he feels that the discrepancies with the subject matter require closer scrutiny.
Anytime you have subject matter of this type, any additional investigation is worthwhile. Absolutely.
Stanton Friedman was further intrigued by the medical techniques in the film.
I don't know what to make of these guys with what seem to be medical instruments, certainly in a medical facility, judging by the stuff on the wall. And it's interesting that you can see their faces, which is interesting from two different directions. You can tell their identity if you could find people that look like that. And they're apparently not afraid of contamination, ingesting anything toxic. Now, that could be that they'd already gone through this routine and somebody had said, hey, there's nothing bad here.
We then showed the film to Dr. Annette Ryan, a former lieutenant colonel with the Army Institute of Pathology.
The first thing that I noticed is the way the doctors are dressed. They're dressed in these pristine white lab coats, and I think it would be more common for them to be dressed in scrubs or even butcher aprons, unless, of course, they know that they're being filmed and they want to look good. They also look very young, but that is consistent with forensic examinations, and that's because senior medical staff usually don't get involved in this type of procedure. I also noticed that they're wearing rubber gloves, but they're not wearing any other protective gear. They're not wearing goggles, they're not wearing masks, they're certainly not wearing any biohazard suits. I would assume that's because they're not concerned with contamination. And this, of course, is typical of Russian-Soviet medicine. I mean, when we think of Chernobyl, just remember back that there was a terrible lapse in any type of protection. It certainly would not happen in the United States. I mean, it would be unheard of.
Next, Dr. Ryan commented on some of the specific medical procedures.
All right, what's happening here is that they're using dissecting scissors to open up the sternum, which is a common procedure at that time. He's using the proper tool. The way they're holding and using the various tools looks correct, which indicates to me these people know what they're doing. I would say there's little doubt that these are actual Russian medical people. Now, if you look closely at this procedure here, which is repeated several times in this footage, what they're doing is removing a piece of material. The one doctor refers to it as an organ or resembling an organ. Then the diener snips off a small sample which is placed in a specimen jar for later analysis. Well, that's exactly what would be done in a forensic case or in the case of scientific research, for instance, if some new species had been discovered. They would remove very small pieces for later chemical and microscopic examination. The lead doctor also mentions a structure he describes as resembling ribs. And here you can see what indeed resembles a rib cage, as if this was the torso of some anthropoid or human-like organism.
Finally, though Dr. Ryan was unable to identify the subject matter, she believes that the techniques were consistent with those practiced in the Soviet Union during the late 1960s. We have little information about the specimen seen here, other than the pathologist's description and the KGB code name, Sverdlovsk midget. We wondered, though, how such a being might appear had it been recovered intact. Using only the images recorded on this film and the scant data available, technicians have constructed this 3D computer-generated model. Thus, with a bit of imagination and some forensic speculation, we have recreated what may have been the Soviets' possession of an actual being from another world.
Information leaked from intelligence sources in the West indicated a belief that the Soviets were actually attempting to reverse engineer something not manufactured on this Earth.
Whether we'll ever know the full truth about the supposed UFO crash in Berezovsky, one thing seems certain. If agents of the KGB or any other branch of the Soviet government did recover parts of a craft made by alien beings, they would have been extremely interested in examining all the materials very closely. No doubt Soviet scientists would have wanted to determine if the parts of the craft were truly of extraterrestrial origin. They would have inspected each piece down to the microscopic level and tested for various physical and chemical properties. And of course, they would have wanted to take advantage of any new technology they could gain from the recovered materials.
И мы не можем расшифровать их физики.
We are unable to solve the puzzle of their physics. Our physics is based on quantum mechanics. Theirs is based on parallel worlds, a different kind of paradigm, a different understanding of history. It is similar to the effect of a TV set or a video camera would produce on people in the time when Pythagoras lived. Pythagoras would not understand it. That is the gap between them and us. That's why, however hard our engineers or technicians would try to decode their technologies, they would fail.
Back in the West, not only did the military consider UFOs a serious subject, but the Soviets' interest in them as well. It seems that, in the beginning anyway, both sides thought that flying saucers were an invention of the other. And that fueled a decades-long campaign of espionage and counter-espionage.
Many believe that U.S. intelligence agencies such as the CIA, NSA, and the military have not been completely forthcoming with information regarding extraterrestrials. The same is apparently true of the KGB. Some claim that the KGB, as well as the U.S. government, may have been using the UFO phenomenon as a smokescreen to cover other top-secret activity from the very beginning. Former NASA scientist Dr. Richard Haynes concurs.
Well, all I can say is that there are verified documents from Stalin's time that showed he had an intense interest in Roswell, what was going on in Roswell, New Mexico in about mid-40s. Well, that makes very good sense from the standpoint that that's where our atomic bomb group was, 509th Bomb Group, from which Hiroshima and Nagasaki events happened, ultimately. It's where the pilots trained. So it's understandable that Moscow would be very interested in this subject from that standpoint. If UFOs are a cover, they have been used very effectively by both sides. So it's to the convenience of the Russian government, Soviet government, to continue the charade. It can be considered a form of disinformation.
There is an alternate theory regarding UFO disinformation. Many researchers believe that the government may be intentionally drawing attention to the less credible, self-proclaimed ufologists as a means of lowering the perceived credibility of all UFO research. Alien abductees and conspiracy theorists are most often the least believable, and at the same time, the most visible. Russian rock and roll singer Natalia Medvedeva claims to have known several people that have had contact with aliens.
One guy died, another got paralyzed, the third one became a heroin addict and could not overcome it.
Sergei Borisovich Proskuryakov is a Russian researcher who has studied anomalous phenomenon and pyramidal constructions. His beliefs may also seem unconventional.
When I lived in Minsk, a KGB officer came to see me. He filmed all the documents I had. I couldn't escape anywhere. I believe they ended up in the KGB archive. I have information that my researchers of interest not as much for KGB or CIA as for presidential structures in the USA.
Are individuals like these truly informed? Or, as some believe, convenient foils for government agencies with an agenda of suppression? Either way, their outspoken beliefs serve to discourage further investigation and make it much easier to simply write off any UFO account or evidence as nonsense. Most genuine researchers, however, believe it is imperative that all potentially genuine encounters with extraterrestrial intelligence be studied carefully.
If something not from this earth had been recovered, it would have been brought to a classified military base high in the Ural Mountains, where super-secret operations are being conducted since the Second World War.
This incredible footage depicts members of the Soviet armed forces and what are believed to be 2 KGB agents inspecting and recovering a crashed flying saucer. Russian author Veniamin Vereshchagin has an idea of the final outcome of this operation.
Насколько мне известно, обломки аппарата.
As far as I know, the debris and their organic parts were taken to Mytishi,
где предположительно были сделаны.
where the apparatus was disassembled, analyzed, and then back engineered.
Неизвестно, что произошло с органическими
As
останками.
for organic parts,
Но я имею сведения о том, что они были перевезены в дальнейшем.
I heard they were taken to Moscow. What happened afterwards, I don't really know.
His story seems to be backed up in part by one of the people who claims to have been involved in the operation back in 1969. We found ex-KGB staffer Pavel Alexandrovich Klimchenkov living in seclusion in the Bryansk region of central Russia. He remembers the strange wreckage found in Beryozovsky.
At first, everyone believed that those debris were parts of some novelty aircraft manufactured in the United States or England. But having done some measuring and material analysis, we came to the conclusion that none of the domestic or foreign manufacturers known to us could have produced this apparatus, at least not in the conditions existing on this plant. It was then that an order came to transport the debris to the base in Mytishi near Moscow. Together with several other officers, I was assigned to provide safety and security to these materials during their transportation.
In attempting to verify the authenticity of this evidence, we have had the footage and the film itself examined by several experts. We also carefully studied the documents we had procured, which lent further credibility to what we had been told. Among the most telling was this top-secret KGB report specifically referring to Operation Sverdlovsk Midget and describing in detail the recovery operation at Beryozevsky. This document mentions the crashed disc, the organic remains, and the filming itself. There was also this secret order from the Soviet Ministry of Defense requesting assistance from military unit 67527. We looked closely at such elements of the footage as the uniforms and the arm patches worn by the soldiers. These patches seem consistent with the patch worn by such Soviet Army air defense companies as military unit 67527.
They're all wearing winter coats, which don't appear to have much in the way of insignia on them. And that is not out of character for the winter coats. They would generally not contain much in the way of identification. These are all members of the same unit. I can see that the weapons are AK-type weapons. The main battle weapon of the Russian army, even up through today's date, is the automatic Kalashnikov weapon. Yeah, it's clearly an AK, fixed stock, birch stock, no muzzle brake, milled receiver, no question about it. It also seems to be consistent with the muzzles of the weapons that I can see in this film.
In addition, we had notes from the scientific examination of the recovered organic specimen, which seemed consistent with the soundtrack of the dissection footage. With so many elements in seeming consistency, Vereshchagin's story becomes even more tantalizing and perplexing at the same time. Is it possible the Russians actually recovered an alien craft and its occupant 3 decades ago?
If members of the Soviet Army had knowledge of a supposed UFO crash, then what happened to these individuals? And if they can't be found today, why not?
In the course of our investigation, our goal was to follow every lead, to search for every scrap of information regarding the incident so named Operation Sverdlovsk Midget. The tenuous paper trail we have reconstructed using recovered government documents led us eventually to a lab of the former All-Union Scientific Research Institute of Biology. In attempting to obtain records on the individuals depicted in the dissection footage, we turned up these additional documents. 3 death certificates, all dated March the 24th, 1969, within a week after records indicate the examination was performed. Cause of death for all 3, cerebral hemorrhage. Dr. Ryan told us that the odds of this occurring naturally are next to 0. The former state-run institute is now a private teaching center known as the Moscow Medical Institute. That this is the same facility as seen in the film footage becomes obvious with a comparison of such fixtures as the stonework tables and the distinctive tiling on the floors. The difference is that one-time experimental procedures have been replaced by routine anatomy lessons with plenty of hands-on experience. Secretive operations are now openly administered educational opportunities. But we did find in the basement of the building remnants of this facility's past, reminders of a time when procedures here were not open to the public or subject to public scrutiny. What were the Soviets experimenting on in decades past at the Research Institute of Biology? The answer to that question is still yet to be found. Indeed, many questions about the film footage and the alleged Operation Sverdlovsk Midget remain unanswered. Any extraordinary find, such as the apparent filmed record of a crashed spacecraft, or of what appears to be scientists examining parts of an alien life form, require further analysis. Yet it seems incredible that so many elements of this story from so many diverse sources appear consistent. The original account as told by researchers and witnesses, the recovered documents, and of course, the film. We have to ask, is this footage genuine? And if so, does it represent an actual case of alien visitation, or, as it has been suggested, was the footage created as part of a Cold War disinformation campaign? One other proposed possibility is that it was simply a military training exercise captured on film. Again, if it is a real UFO crash, where are the remnants? And what happened to the body of the alien being?
With all that we have unearthed here, the big question seems to be, what is the significance of what are clearly some very profound discoveries? And will we ever know the full story? We hope you've enjoyed visiting Russia with us, and we hope you've gained some insights on what promises to be a continuing source of intrigue and controversy. Thank you for joining us. I'm Roger Moore in Red Square.